Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me ears, ladies and gentlemen. You are tuned to the MC Lars podcast. This is episode 59. It is October 14th, 2019. I'm here with Suzanne McDermott this week. And I want to give a shout out, as always, to the Patreon supporters who keep this thing alive. Shout out to the new ones, JC King, Iller Tenchi, and Nick DeRieger. Thank you very much. And shout out to the OG original supporters, Sheridan, Liam, and Wade. Thank you very much. If you want to listen to the entire back catalog of Patreon songs and be featured on the podcast, check it out. Patreon.com/MCLars. You get essays, videos, instrumentals, ringtones, merch, a live annual show that you get to tune into stream. It's super cool. Be sure to check that out, and shout out to the supporters. So, Suzanne McDermott. Many of you may have heard on Indie Rocket Science, which was the mixtape I put out right before Lars Attacks, I had a song called The Roswell Incident. And this song was based on a song Suzanne McDermott wrote that is a very beautiful, haunting folk song about what may have happened in Roswell. And as we talk about on the podcast, I like to take old literature and bring it to life with my literary lit hop raps. McDermott took the story from the perspective of two kids and told the story of what happens when, supposedly what happened in 1947 in Roswell went down. I messaged McDermott. I sent her the song, and I was so happy that she liked my version, because my version is different. Hers has a chorus and it has kind of a cadence. I kind of truncated the story and took her descriptions and turned it into a rap. Then the chorus is like samples from the news reports. I remember right before I left for college, I saw this movie called 6 Days in Roswell, and I was dating someone whose family lived up in Seattle, and her brother had worked on this documentary. And it's a really funny documentary about this dude from Minnesota who, it's kind of like a mockumentary, but he comes down to Roswell for the 50th anniversary of the supposed saucer landing. And all this is very topical now with the quote unquote Area 51 raid and everything. But he goes and interviews people on the 50th anniversary, and McDermott was there because she made an EP based on this song and was there promoting it and playing shows. And she ended up being in the documentary because she plays this song and it plays over the credits. But this song always had a really profound, visceral impact on me because, as you'll hear, I'll play the song after the interview. The kid has to go along with her father saying, no, we can't talk about this. The government doesn't want us to talk about it. Let's not talk about it. This is something that is like off limits for discussion. And it creates a barrier between the father and the daughter. And it's like, it's a sad story because it's like kind of highlights the line between childhood and adulthood. And this girl who's just living on a ranch and her father sees the UFO or whatever it is, the government secret, and can't talk about it. And she's like, the cadence is, what could we learn if we talked about it? And what I love about the song is she talks about this interview. She went through real interviews with people to try to describe the field of weird debris. So this song always, for me, when I listen to it, takes me back to that memory of high school, the end of high school, right before college. And like a few weeks before 9/11 happened is when I first heard this song. And it kind of reminds me of like that innocence of living in a world before horrible or scary or weird things can happen, right? And I know that's kind of like an extended, broad metaphor, but that's why the song has a lot of meaning to me, because it kind of feels like, to me, a link to childhood, pre-college life, if that makes sense. Anyway, it was great talking to Suzanne. She's a really interesting, eloquent woman, and she has a lot to say, and I encourage you all to go check out her music, buy her CDs, stream her stuff. It's on Spotify. She's a wise and talented artist. So this is my interview with Suzanne McDermott. Ladies and gentlemen, I am talking to Suzanne McDermott, and I've loved her music for a very long time, maybe about, I would say, close to 20 years. And I think it's really cool to have her on the podcast. And as many of the fans know, I did a cover of her Roswell song on one of my mixtapes. I recently reached out to you and sent it to you, and I was very happy that you didn't hate it. So that was a good surprise.
No, I loved it.
Have you ever had any rappers cover your songs like that?
Not to my knowledge. Although, you're a perfect example of, something being out there and me not being aware of it at all. And that's not the first time that's happened, and it's not the first time it's happened with that song.
Let's get right into it. Where are you from, and how do you think growing up where you did influenced you as both an artist and a healer?
Oh, it's so interesting that you picked up on the healer portion, because that's not something that I consciously really have been promoting, but we can talk about that a little bit. I was born in Bryn Mawr Hospital, and I grew up in suburban Philadelphia along what is known as the Main Line. As an artist, both musical and visual and literary, poetically, I have to credit certainly both of my parents and the location. So my father was an early audiophile and a great lover of music. He caught Toscanini's baton once and bought albums from Sam Goody at his first record store in New York. And anyway, so lots of music. My mother was a musician too, not professionally, but she was also a poet and watercolor artist. So I just grew up in an extremely enriched environment. And, my mom would sleep with the Oxford Book of English Poetry next to her bed, and my father knew Shakespeare like the back of his hand. So also, I grew up right where the Philadelphia Museum was and Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and lots of art museums in addition to those. And also, musically, of course, there was the Philadelphia Orchestra and lots of great music and musicians in Philadelphia, but there was a folk club in Bryn Mawr called the Main Point that had performers from like early blues players to folk singer-songwriters of the era to classical music performances to like Lou Reed when he split off from the Velvet Underground. And it's where Springsteen did his E Street Band's first performances. So like everybody played there, and they played there from Wednesday through Sunday. And because I was really young and already performing, they would let me in for free, and I would sit in the radiator at the back of the 200-seat hall, and I could just watch these performers over and over and over again. And that was a great, great education. So that, and then, regarding the healing thing, my dad was a big physical fitness freak, and he rode single scull on the Schuylkill when he was a young man, and also went to health food stores before there were such things, really. So we always had really healthy food in the house, and my father made sure that my brother and I both were swimming when we were very, very young, and my mother was into the very early self-help books and spiritual books. So it was, all of that stuff was very integral to my upbringing and experience. And playing music, writing, painting, all that stuff is creative healing process in and of itself, right? So,
yeah, right.
When I've fallen apart in my life, oftentimes I'll tell myself to just draw. You just pick up a pencil or a pen and just start drawing. And so how's that for an answer?
That's a great answer. So you grew up in Philadelphia till college?
I grew up in suburban Philadelphia. Difference. Although I went into Philadelphia to both study at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and to work at a music store in downtown for a little while. Oh, yeah. Plus, I worked for a music publisher when I was in high school through my early 20s, Theodore Presser Music Company. I didn't go right to college. I went to LA. and I spent my 20s in Santa Monica working for a guitar shop and concert series that was not the guitar shop, but the concert series was based on the Main Point. It was started by Bobby Kimmel, who founded the Stone Ponies and discovered Linda Ronstadt. And then it was one of those stories where I happened to walk in the door to apply for a job, and he was sitting there, and he found out that I'd, basically spent half of my high school years at the Main Point, and hired me to work at McCabe's. And then I designed the McCabe's t-shirt, and then other stuff happened. But also I worked for Sarah Vaughan out there as her secretary for a few years. And suddenly I was embedded in the great jazz world. And that was, wow, what a privilege. And yeah.
That's cool. It's, Suzanne, it seems like when I talk to veterans in the arts world, it seems like there was this interesting culture where, and my career started at the end of this, where going to a physical place had a lot of magic and mystery and ability to have like a connection with someone like, oh, I used to go to a lot of shows at this place, or I trained with these teachers, where now it just, everything feels so like digital tribes and digital communities, and going to a place to become an expert or become a like super skilled practitioner is such a romantic, beautiful like thing. It's like this idea of you leaving for California and then meeting this person, and it's cool. And I wonder if the world is still that way, if you live like a singularly unique like experience in a specific time,
Who, me?
Yeah, you specifically. Yeah,
yeah, you. Yeah. But yes, it was a very different time, and yes, different locations. I think energetically still have different. What I always have called a gestalt. There's a different energetic makeup to different places on the globe. And yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But like Los Angeles was very unique, and it still is. But there were fewer people on the planet, so everything wasn't so. And yes, you would go to a particular place to study with a particular person, and or to interact with a certain group of people. And in LA. When I arrived, it was just after, a lot of people moved from Europe. A lot of artists and musicians, composers and so forth moved from Europe to Los Angeles because of the Second World War and the Nazi regime. So there was like Thomas Mann and Arnold Schoenberg and a lot of other people, like Aldous Huxley lived there, but not for the same reason. And so that particular group of people were still kind of influencing the mindset, I think, of the people who lived in LA. So anyway, there was that, but also everything wasn't such a scene. It was a little bit more relaxed. I could walk in, walk up and meet somebody or interact with someone who now we wouldn't really be able to touch or interact with.
Connecting with people in a physical realm to further your own creative journey, and how like for me, I'm from California. I moved to the East Coast, and that really changed my life, and like, it's important to be fearless. And if you have the opportunity to do it, I would recommend young people do it instead of just trying to build their music careers online from the town they grew up in.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, just as an aside, a very good friend of mine just died a few days ago. Chris Rouse, who's he taught at Eastman, composition at Eastman and Juilliard. But when we were friends with a couple of other people, we were all in Philadelphia, and I think he was working at Sam Goody's, and he had come to Philadelphia to study with the composer George Crumb. And, that brought him to Philadelphia between Oberlin and Cornell. And that, amongst a small group of people, and I'm sure it resonated out from there, was really important. But, the world is a really different place now. I don't have to probably say that out loud. And still, travel is really critical, I think, to kind of bumping up against other people, especially when you're young. And I don't really know what local scenes are like anymore. If everything's really become digitalized, but we had a different experience of the world, and I haven't actually sat down to tease that out to see, what really the differences are, because, and I think this is true of even cultural critics or people who write about this, is that we are all in it right now. We are all in the digital age, like what we're doing here, and so it's an interesting question, and I think it's worth a whole set of interviews or a whole set of podcasts with people to explore that. But the delivery of music was different. The recording of music was different. Even when I was just recording my first album, we were just switching from, and this really sounds like the Dark Ages, but it wasn't that long ago, although it was kind of, depending on who you're talking to, switching from analog to digital. The studios all had big, the tape reels and stuff. And anyway, yeah.
So let's talk about that. So you presumably had written many songs up until you wrote your first album. Like, I'm sure that was always a dream of yours, right? To be in a studio and do an album, or did it kind of manifest quickly for you? Like, what was the process to making the first record?
Yeah. How do you know that? The process was, and I'll be as succinct as I can. I performed, I started performing when I was like 5 or 6, but, I started performing in clubs when I was like 15. And then I had no idea how to make a career out of that. And I wasn't really writing yet. So time passes. And in Santa Monica, I started performing again, in my mid-20s, I guess. And, except for McCabe's and maybe the Ash Grove and the Troubadour, there really weren't places for me to perform. So I wound up performing with a lot of the early alternative bands and the kind of in the post-punk clubs, like the Anti-Club. And, I hung out with the Fibonaccis. They were a really great kind of art performance band, and they shared a studio with X or Wall of Voodoo. I forget which one. Anyway, so cool. That was those were the people that I was performing around when I was essentially, even though I was playing a Gibson 335. That was I was playing fingerstyle guitar and performing the same kind of songs that that I do, and so it's what would be classified as folk, but that's where I was performing, and that was kind of the scene there, and a place to perform.
And did you have a band, or would you often play solo?
Always solo. I mean, always. It's just
wow.
Yeah, I've always performed solo, and the kind of guitar work that I do is, in a way, it's almost orchestral. Because it's fingerstyle, and I can do a lot of things with it, and the rhythms that I have embedded in that, and the harmonies, they're really integral with my the vocal line. And I found the one problem I found when I was working with engineers or didn't claim complete control over the process, which I couldn't always do, was that my recordings, people tended to want to put the voice in front and the guitar in back, like, girl and guitar. And I really hear the music that I would write, the songs that I would write, the vocal line and the guitar work are really integral.
Yeah, that makes sense. And your albums have layers, but the guitar and the singing are the two main elements, and that's cool.
I did write some of the lines for the first album, Souvenir, and I had musician friends in the Boston area come in and do the work with me, and then I did some of the percussion. I toured Europe a lot, and I sort of fell in love with these musicians who worked with Odd van Moers in the Netherlands. There was a sax player, Menno Romers, and a drummer, both of whom I was really fond of. And so what I wound up doing is using that group of musicians for Ephemera and then The Glory. And I just loved their musicianship. I loved the choices they would make harmonically. And I really trusted their whatever they wanted to say, musically. And so that's why I did half of Ephemera in Holland and all of The Glory there.
Talk about travel, right? The importance of travel.
Yeah, that's right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of Ephemera, if you don't mind, I'd love to talk about the Roswell Incident.
Let's do that.
A lot of what I like to do with my writing is I'll take like a Shakespeare play and turn it into a song, or Edgar Allan Poe, or old lit. I call it lit hop, and it's like retelling these stories. And what always struck me so much about that song is your emotional memory of the events of that day, and how it's almost like very emotional, how a child would feel realizing that the covering of a government conspiracy is so alien, so to speak, to all the goodness and truth and light that a kid sees the world. You're supposed to tell the truth, Dad. You're supposed to, if you see a spaceship crash, you're supposed to tell the world. You're not supposed to keep it secret. And how the character in that song is confronted with this harsh reality of how adults operate. And it's such a poignant, sad, beautiful song that's like, I was like, wait, was this person there at the incident? No, it couldn't be. She's too young.
Thank you.
So yeah. So it's like you had to have anyway, I've always loved that song, and I would love to hear about how you even thought of writing a song like that.
Okay. Here it comes. Yeah. You ready? All right. So I was at a folk festival and someone said, "Oh yeah, I lived near Area 51," and I was like, "What? What? Tell me what that is again." And then I started thinking about Roswell, and then I thought, "Oh my God," because I had written a song about J. Robert Oppenheimer and the events in his personal life leading up to the creation of the first atomic bomb, and so that. I really think of the Roswell song as sort of a companion piece to that Oppenheimer song. And I wrote them many, many years apart. But so I thought, wow, the Roswell Incident, what a great idea for a sort of a Dust Bowl ballad treatment, like a Woody Guthrie kind of thing. I mean, not that I would copy him. It sort of came out my own way. But anyhow, so that was the kernel. And then it's such a complex subject and event. And, did it happen? Did it not happen? And so I decided to treat it as a legend rather than, a story, I didn't want to make fun of it. And I think that at least for a long time, a lot of songs, amongst other things, about aliens or quote unquote spaceships, flying saucers, whatever, they make a joke out of it. Mm-hmm. So then I just read everything I could find on the Roswell Incident. And that was actually, I think, the year that Men in Black came out. Like right when I was in the middle of it, Men in Black came out. And I was like, wow. Or what was the other thing? What was the other movie with Will Smith?
Independence Day?
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. I think it was Independence Day. That's right. So I read a lot, and then I thought, okay, now I know all. I've read all this information. And then the big problem was framing it. Like, how am I going to tell the story, and make it coherent? So there were two children involved. There was the daughter of Mac Brazel, the flying saucer allegedly crashed on. And then there was the son of the military officer who was charged with cleaning it up. Mm-hmm. And so what I did was I merged the two children and made the child the narrator. And then everything just went, everything fell into place. So that was the device I used. And actually what happens in the song is, so it's very personal, because what I did was I lifted a lot of that song I just lifted verbatim interviews with the children and with other people in the area. And I just kind of, right? So I took their words and I planted them in the song. And then the thing that happens is that it's not so much that the child is, thinks that the truth should be told, but what happens is at the end, when she asks her father what happened, she never got an answer. So there's the kind of meta, maybe, conspiracy, of a government cover-up and that, but there's also the wedge of silence that's driven between a parent and a child. Right? So that, and many, many people thought I was really talking about my father. And I'm like, no.
Impossible. Yeah.
No, I'm not that old. That is how the song came about. And the first time I sang it, I was scared to death because I was A, an opening act, B, the person I was opening for was kind of not really even a folkie. I was in a little club. It's a 6+ minute song about a flying saucer. and I had never performed it before, and there, as you know, a lot of words. So
Right.
I thought, okay, here goes nothing. And so I performed it, and I was just shocked by how moved people were by the song. I was not expecting that at all. And so over the years, amazing things happened, like an older man who, older than me, older man came up to me once and was like, I was in the Air Force and we were scheduled to land in Roswell at that time, and they redirected our flight. So that was,
wow.
Yeah. And so things happened that, or people came up to me with personal stories that I could never have imagined. And so that was kind of cool.
Stories about encounters maybe, or stories about Roswell?
No, not encounters. Stories about Roswell, either their own or their father's or somebody's, like, very much down to earth experience that would indicate that something big really happened in Roswell in 1947. So, yeah.
Wow. And it's like telling the story from a perspective of a character who's not a central character tends to have, you have the liberty to create a lot of weight and emotional honesty, because your character is observing the events and she doesn't know what to think. And that creates a very honest portrait of this period in our history of our country where we don't know what to think either. So I think she is very timelessly relatable.
Thank you. That's a high compliment. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because I've never had an opportunity to actually say this before. And it does apply to the Oppenheimer song, which is really a song that I wrote that brought me back. I thought, this is such an important song that I really need to get back out there and start writing again. But anyway, I write I don't write with the intention of whatever you just said, about making something, emotionally relatable, or I don't write from that kind of construct. I really write in a way like an actor. So I look at a situation. I mean, some of my songs are personal, like the song I wrote about my mother, When You Became My Child. So that's a very personal song, and there are a couple more. But when I write songs like Roswell or Oppenheimer, or like Bonnie Ann, about Anne Bonny the pirate, or I have a song about a monster, Afraid of the Dark. And so what I do is, my natural inclination, this isn't something I intended to do, it's just something that I naturally did. And I kind of put myself into the character, and then I speak from the character, or the character's perspective. So, in the case of Roswell, once I decided on the narrator, then I could sort of step into the character of the narrator, who was actually two real people, and then tell the story from my imagined perspective, right? So that's how that happens. And I have to add that the son of the military officer in Roswell, he was an MD, a doctor, and he was there with several of his children and his wife. And he invited me up to his room with the children and his wife to sing the song for him. So I was in this dark hotel room singing to, he was such a lovely man too, singing to the person who I was quoting him as a child in the song. It was surreal and emotional, I think, for everybody, but especially for the two of us. And fortunately, he liked the song. And that was really unexpected. And I mean, that happened with the Oppenheimer song too. Just very briefly, long after I wrote the Oppenheimer song, I worked at MIT and was friendly with a few of the older physicists who worked on the Manhattan Project. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was also a very interesting experience. So anyway, back to you, Lars.
No, it's interesting how songs can become like humans in that they have their own agency. They have their own traveling patterns. They have their own life of their own. It's fascinating, and how you would never think you'd meet this human who you inspired your character role, or you probably never think you'd ever meet a rapper who did a cover of one of your songs and asked you to be on his podcast, right? Exactly.
Yeah. And not only that, one day, I got a call from a producer in Sweden who was part of and producer of a little band there, and they wanted to use the Roswell song, which they heard at the end of the soundtrack of 6 Days in Roswell. And so they wound up using the music, writing Swedish lyrics called Min Papa, my father, and then it was different from there on in. It wasn't about the Roswell Incident. But it won Swedish Grammys, and it was sort of a big deal. And in Sweden. So that was amazing.
How did you connect with the 6 Days in Roswell team, and what was it like working on that? Because it's a very emotional, for the audience listening, really recommend this movie because it's a very evocative closing scene, because it's kind of funny throughout the movie, and then there's this like emotional weight to the end where you're featured over the credits and you're playing live. And let's talk about all that experience, like being in a documentary.
I'll try not to ruin it for you. Well, just a little background. So I wrote the song, and then I was in San Francisco at a college friend's apartment, and a bunch of us were sitting talking, and this friend, one of my college friends, who is always coming up with great ideas, he's like, "You've got to put this on an EP." He's like, "You have to release this, and you have to go to Roswell." And so I made a recording, put it on an EP. I think I sent a package to the then mayor of Roswell, who loved it.
Yeah.
And so I was invited to go to Roswell to perform, it's not the original hangar, but in the hangar for the big dinner for the mucky mucks, involved in the 50th anniversary of the Roswell Incident. So, and what's his name? Whitley Strieber.
Oh, the guy who wrote Communion?
Yeah, he was there.
Yeah, right.
And
did you talk to him?
Oh, yeah. I think we sat at the same table.
Wow.
I got a little booth at the convention, and it was an amazing event. So, in a nutshell, there were because it was so highly publicized, there were more press there than there were attendees. Also,
wow,
there were these different factions. So there were just sort of family fun people there with their kids, just like for a Americana fare. Yeah, it really was like walking through a Ray Bradbury story, the whole thing.
Wow.
And so there was just sort of the Americana fun, family fun stuff that was going on. And then there was a very serious convention of military types who'd written scholarly articles and, the real serious people who people take seriously. Then there was the sort of lunatic fringe of, people who, I don't know, but people who'd been on board the spaceships and stuff. And for example, like right next to me in my booth, there were a group of people. One of the women was in a cat costume, like with a leotard and makeup and stuff. And their shtick was that Jesus was an alien. And they kept shouting, "I am not of this world."
Right.
So it was just this weird combination of all different types of people and groups of people. And I booked a bunch of gigs there, everything that I could. And one of them was for the city in this outdoor venue. So I get there, stuff's happening, and there's this camera crew walking around with a guy who's interviewing people.
Right.
And they're all Canadian, lovely, lovely guys, really fun. And so we kept bumping into each other because it was kind of a small, it's a small town and you could only go so many places. So we kept bumping into each other and they kept filming me and we got to be very friendly. And then when I performed at what you saw over the end credits, I was under a tent outside. The cord to my guitar just barely allowed me to reach the vocal microphone. So I was physically uncomfortable. And then there were 6 people in the audience plus the film crew. So that's normal.
Right.
Touring as a folk musician, the great experiences that's not completely true, but you get used to playing for a few people. And that goes for anybody.
Yes.
So, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. That's
just the nature of touring, especially touring solo and just booking as many gigs as you can. But anyway, so time passes. I don't know, maybe a whole year goes by, and I get a call from Roger Nygaard, who's one of the loveliest guys, and he was the producer of this, and he produced Trekkies, the movie, and he's an editor, and he makes these indie movies, and so he was editor for Veep and Curb Your Enthusiasm, I think, since then. But anyway, he calls me up and introduces himself and asks me if he can use that footage of me and, boilerplate contract. And so that, and it was another year or so before the movie was released, I think. And that's how that happened.
Wow.
And then, it because Roger's very savvy and well-connected, he really moves his films through the international festival circuit as much as he can. And that's why the guy in Sweden heard the song, because he was a producer and he heard the movie, and then his assistant in the office said, yeah. And then he just sat there and he watched the end credits over and over and over again. So they did actually edit the song.
Oh, they did?
Yeah. But I would be the only person that is aware of that, because I was like, what just happened? Yeah. Oh. But that's okay. Yeah, that's fine. I know that. And Roger knows that.
And now our listeners know that.
And now your listeners know that.
But you have a lot of your work on your website. You have a very cool website. And part of your business now is you do this thing called creative coaching.
I do, to select clients.
How has being a teacher of creativity has helped you personally with your own projects?
I would say that it's helped me become more compassionate, but also it's just a way of teaching people. If I'm doing creative coaching, if I'm helping people with a creative project, then like I know how to do stuff. Like I know how to break a process down. I know how to break a project down so that it's doable. It is manageable, that you can get through to the next steps and keep the end result in sight and reach it and complete the project. I was listening to an astrologer friend the other day do a YouTube thing, and he was saying, I'm a Virgo, right? He was like, I'm a Virgo, and I really need a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like, if you're not going to finish something, he was talking about George Martin and Game of Thrones. He's like, if you're not going to finish something, like, why bother starting it? But so there are so many places, to address the second part of your question. There's so many places because creative projects have so many different aspects to them, not just the whatever you're doing, whether it's an exhibit you're going to mount and you need to do the paintings for it, if you're making an album, or if you just want to, write a book, whatever it is you're doing. There's so many different parts and movable parts and things that, obstacles that are going to arise, both internally and externally. And there are going to be things that are out of your control, and you're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to, there's so many ways, but the point is, I think that, if I were just going to use one phrase, it's don't give up. And on the other hand, the Seth Godin thing is there's an old fashioned, like early 20th century poem, like don't give up. I forget what it is. I meant to pull it out, but I forgot. And when things are, it's very sing-songy, but, and the last line of each verse is, you might think of doing it, but don't give up. So, there's a lot to be said for perseverance, for being able to adjust. Also, being kind to yourself and knowing when to rest. Because we're in such a go, do, succeed, achieve, it's just like, oh my God, just stop for a minute, Yeah. So much of the creative process is, as a sculptor I talked to once said, just standing around with a cup of coffee in my hand,
Right.
Like, it's true. It's true. And we lose sight of the fact because time is changing now too. And our perception of time is changing. Like, everything's changing right now. And you have to be able to be your own best friend, love yourself, give yourself a break without thinking it's the end of the world, and kind of readjusting, So there's so many reasons why people might run into trouble. Creative types might run into trouble. When I was really young, it didn't cost a fortune to rent an apartment. The overhead alone was not a source of great stress. Now, we're in a situation on the planet where everything is a source of stress. Yeah. So, the other thing that's really important to remember. Like, you could just slap it on your forehead or on your bathroom mirror, and that is like, what is your why? Why are you doing this? Not so much what you're getting out of it, but you do have to ask yourself that at certain points. And then oftentimes, and anyone will tell you this, oftentimes the end result is not what you originally envisioned. And also, I have a lot to say about this, so I'll just wrap this up here. But I mean, because
it's good. This is great.
Literally have spent my life, choosing to do creative work. And I do want to talk about form before we get off. But oftentimes, the end result, like, you don't even know what the end result is. You can't imagine. So, for example, if you're writing a novel, like most novelists will tell you, yeah, I had no idea I don't write novels, okay? I don't read many novels, but I've heard many interviews with writers who say that the characters tend to take over the plot, or that, it's character driven, and, like, what happens. And that TV writers, they don't know, like, if they're going to have 13 seasons and what's going to happen by the end of the 13th season. So
right.
The reason I'm saying that is that a lot of times you don't really know what the end is, but you're following an idea. So, for example, when I started the Roswell song, I had no idea that it was going to be narrated by a child. And also, I didn't know it was going to be 6 minutes and, almost a 7-minute song. And, I took a lot of flack from fellow singer-songwriters about that, when people want to be mean or whatever. But,
why? They think it's too long? They say it's too long, or what?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
That was probably a case where they were waiting to take their turn. But,
right.
But I mean, that was, and I don't even think about, like, I don't intentionally, sometimes I do, but it depends, like rhyme schemes, or, a lot of my songs don't follow particular formulas. So anyway, but back to the creative coaching thing, it's a way of helping people to share what I've learned, which is how, a lot of it is project management. I just love form. I love poetic form, musical form. With visual art, it's not so much about that unless we're looking at the history of painting or art history or something, but or architecture. But I'm fascinated by creative form and how to work within the different rules or structures or whatever. It's a way of exploring an idea and or emotion or an impulse to make something in a different set of architectural rules, let's say. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you think you'll ever want to write more songs?
I love writing songs, but I'm a very pragmatic person. So I don't do things and then stick them in drawers. Like Charles Ives could write a symphony and stick it, under the bed or in a drawer or something. I'm kind of project oriented. So and plus, I have to be performing in order to sing the song. Because to me, it's a way of communicating, and then I want people to hear it. And I'm naturally a performer. But at this stage of the game, I would have to have a reason. And sure, I think there's a lot to write about. And I do think about it, but it also takes time.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time. My guitar chops have to be up. All of these pursuits involve time, practice, lots of practice, and even just, oh my God, just to learn one of my songs. For me, to learn, to compose and learn and get it into muscle memory, one of my songs. So it would, I've thought about, different ways of doing it, but, as a solo person, really, there's, house cleaning, laundry, there's just all the things that take up time in a day. And, I did it. I woke up one day and I was just like, oops, I better do this now. Yeah. Because, otherwise I'm going to be 65 and filled with regret. So I went for it and I did it, and I recommend that people do it that's why, when you look at the music scene, except for big name, blockbuster acts or performers, writers, artists, whatever, it's mostly all young people.
Right. I agree, because they they can be on the road. It's not so hard on their bodies and souls to live in a van. Oh yeah. And I knew right away, I was just like, oh, this is not a life for me. Yeah. It was a lot. But, and that's why I started teaching drawing and watercolor, because I thought, well, I'm not employable anymore, once you work for yourself, But anyway, it's a very different world too. So one of the reasons I stopped was after 9/11, I was like, what do you mean I can't put my guitar in the overhead? Oh, right. And it just got to be, too complicated, and for many reasons. But anyway. So I would love to write songs. I love the process. I love doing it, but I really need, I'm a project-oriented person, so. That's a good perspective. That's a great answer. So if the right opportunity came and it made sense and the project made sense, maybe, but like you said, standing with a cup of coffee, that's part of the creative process. Living life gives you this fuel for whatever it is you do creatively. And I think that's a message that people forget, because everyone wants the likes, the views, the streaming, the hits, where we lose sight of like the why. Why are we doing this? And I love that you said that. It's like such a great thing to come back to, Why? Well, because you have no choice. You want to say it. Not that you should, you want to when you do create something. I think that's important. Yeah.
Well, somebody's why might be a yacht.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So, it on the one hand, it's the whole and that whole thing. It's, if you step back, it is sort of insane, but that's sort of the construct that y'all are working within right now. Plus, it's just a completely different scene right now. My brother's oldest son just came into this town where I've been living, and with his girlfriend, and they played to there were 3 acts on the bill, but they played to a packed, big theater. And I was just like, explain to me, what is this scene? I don't understand this, So, the entire music scene has just radically changed from, when I started recording and touring.
You know what, Suzanne? Good songs will always be timeless, and your songs are timeless. And
thanks.
I think about that too, how the scene I started in has changed, and it always changes, especially hip hop is forever reinventing itself. And creating those good songs is something that will last forever, and it transcends a scene and transcends all of that. And I like to remind myself that,
Well, it's good to be heard. I like it when the songs are heard. And that's sort of
that's true. Too.
That's my dream, is like, there's so much out there.
Yeah.
And, I love my songs.
Yeah.
I love my songs, and they're not, hits. But then, I always think of the Ode to Billy Joe. And that's not what you would consider a hit song. And yet it really, it was.
This has been great. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your insight. And I want to direct the listeners. Your stuff is on Spotify. It's streaming.
SuzanneMcDermott.com. The difference in payment from Spotify to any other streaming medium is considerable. But when, what I try to keep in mind is the prime focus is to have people listen.
Right.
They're on YouTube too. They're all over the place.
Amazon,
iTunes, everywhere. Everywhere you can stream something, you can listen to my songs. And this was just such a treat, Lars.
Well, Suzanne, thank you for your time. This has been awesome. And thanks for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I hope that you enjoyed yourself and that your listeners enjoyed this too.
I know they did. All right. Thanks.
All right.
See ya.
Thanks. Okay. Bye.
Father was a rancher east of Socorro, southeast of Corona, near Roswell, New Mexico. In the middle of nowhere, no radio, no telephone. 1947, and I was 12 years old. Big lightning storm one night, beginning of July. We heard an explosion, wondered why. Riding out the next morning over the pasture to check on some sheep, that's when Daddy found it, the big field of weird debris. He brought some of it home then, laid it out on the kitchen floor. Bits and pieces of things we'd never seen before. Like foil but not foil, like wood but not wood, like wire, waxed paper, all weighing much less than it should. And everything was so strong, we couldn't cut it or scrape it, pliable, unnatural. We couldn't burn or break it. And there were symbols in purple and pink, like a transparent recipe, ranged out in columns, but nothing we could read. A couple days later, Daddy drove into Corona, and there he heard the stories, what had been seen by others. Near Magdalena, on the plains of San Augustine, a civil engineer and an archaeological research team found a disc-shaped object surrounded by creatures like human but not human, round heads, no hair, small features. A military officer drove up and ordered everyone to leave, swore them to silence their patriotic duty. Then a couple in Roswell, stargazing from their front porch, watched an object speeding through the night of the biggest storm, like two inverted saucers glowing from the inside, headed straight for the lightning, right out to where we resided. This said we knew what we saw. No rocket, no weather balloon. Why keep it a secret? What could we learn? What could we learn? We don't know, but we do know two things. We know what we saw. We know that we are not alone. Roswell, where he met with the sheriff, who called up the army, who came for my father, took him out to the pasture with trucks and soldiers, where they picked up the pieces and carried them all away. Then they jailed my father, asked him questions under guard in a small room. From head to foot tested him. He said, you know what I saw. I don't know why you're doing this to me, but I will keep it a secret because you say it's my duty. 1 week later, he came home on an airplane, said forget all about it. He never spoke of it again. But sometimes I asked him, Daddy, was it from another planet? Was it something from the future? But I never got an answer. Still I know what I saw. I don't care what they told him. Why keep it a secret? What could we learn? What could we learn? Well, I don't know, but I do know two things. I know what I saw, and I know that we are not alone. Yeah, I know what I saw. I don't care what you're thinking. Why keep it a secret? What could we learn? What could we learn? Well, I don't know, but I do know two things. I know what I saw, and I know that we are not alone.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was super tight. And I enjoyed hearing what you had to say. And thanks for letting us play your song. And thank you for being on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for this week's MC Lars Patreon Larson of the week. This week we got Lars Sneed, my homeboy. He comes to all my North Carolina shows. He drives far. I think Lars Sneed has been like more shows than anyone. He's in the top. So he tells the story of how he discovered my music, and it's a very good story. Take it away, Lars.
Yo, MC Lars, this is your boy Lars Sneed. I'm in middle of nowhere, the mill stop that I saw a sticker for you on the wall that's about 13 years old in 2006 when I drove down to North Carolina and see you. Saw that same Ask Intruders, remembered when I came down to see you, wanted to call up and talk about that. See you later. Bye.
Amazing. So next week on the podcast, we have Erin Tonkin, who was one of the engineers on Bowie's last few records. She's a producer who went to NYU. She produces and mixes. A very talented woman, very cool, awesome friend who I know, a friend of my wife's, and she's just great. She has a lot to say about the music industry and entrepreneurialism, and it's an honor to have her on the show. So tune in next week. Thanks everyone who came out to see Oakley Dokley and myself, Rockin' House on the West Coast. I got shows coming up, but I can't announce them. But I'm going to be touring early next year, so that's what's up. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm so excited like that the podcast is still growing and we're getting new people every week. And so please leave a review, tell your friends. Apple Podcasts is like a great way to leave a review. Sign into your mom's account, sign in your friend's account. It helps. It definitely helps. But until then, we'll see you next week. Thank you, Suzanne, and I'll see you guys later. Bye. Oh, by the way, it's MC Lars.